The story of Moses is one of the most dramatic and enduring in human history. It is a tale that transcends time, culture, and religion, resonating deeply with people from all walks of life. It is a story of faith, courage, and leadership. Moses' life is a testament to the power of belief and the strength of the human spirit. It is a story that has inspired people for millennia. From ancient times to the present day, the narrative of Moses has been a source of hope and inspiration. Moses' journey began in ancient Egypt, during a time when the Israelites, his people, were enslaved by the Pharaoh. The Israelites toiled under the harsh sun, building the grand monuments and cities of Egypt. Fearing the growing number of Israelites, the Pharaoh ordered all newborn Hebrew boys to be drowned in the Nile River. This cruel decree was meant to curb the population and prevent any potential uprising. In a desperate attempt to save her infant son, Moses' mother placed him in a basket and set him adrift among the reeds by the riverbank. Her heart was heavy with fear and hope as she watched the basket float away. Fate intervened when the Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby Moses. She was drawn to the crying infant and, moved by compassion, decided to take him in. Moved with compassion, she adopted him as her own, unaware of his true heritage. She named him Moses, meaning drawn out of the water, and raised him as a prince of Egypt. Moses grew up in the lap of luxury, surrounded by the splendor and privilege of the Egyptian court. He lived in opulent palaces, wore fine clothes, and enjoyed the best that life had to offer. He received the finest education, trained in the arts of war and peace, and was groomed for a life of power and influence. Moses was taught by the best scholars and warriors, preparing him for a future as a leader. Yet, despite his privileged upbringing, Moses never forgot his roots. He often found himself gazing out over the Nile, lost in thought, pondering his place in the world. Deep down, he knew he was different, set apart by a destiny he could not yet comprehend. The whispers of his true heritage and the plight of his people stirred something deep within him, setting the stage for the extraordinary journey that lay ahead. One fateful day, Moses witnessed an Egyptian overseer brutally beating a Hebrew slave. Overcome with anger and a sense of justice, Moses intervened, killing the overseer. This act of defiance had dire consequences. Fearful for his life, Moses fled Egypt, leaving behind the only world he had ever known. He journeyed across the desert, seeking refuge in the land of Midian. There he encountered a priest named Jethro and his daughters. Moses, once a prince, now a fugitive, embraced this humble life, marrying Jethro's daughter Zipporah and becoming a shepherd. Years passed, and Moses lived a quiet life, tending his flocks in the wilderness. Yet the memory of his people, still enslaved in Egypt, never faded. His heart yearned for their freedom, for the day when they would be liberated from oppression. One ordinary day, while tending his sheep, Moses came across a sight that would forever change his life. He saw a bush engulfed in flames, yet it was not consumed by the fire. Intrigued and apprehensive, Moses approached the burning bush. The sight was unlike anything he had ever seen. The bush was engulfed in flames, yet it was not consumed. The fire danced and flickered, casting an otherworldly glow that seemed to beckon him closer. His heart pounded in his chest as he took cautious steps forward, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. To his astonishment, he heard a voice calling out to him from the midst of the flames. The voice was powerful yet gentle, resonating deep within his soul. It called his name, Moses, Moses, and he could feel the weight of the words as if they were a physical presence. He stood frozen, his mind racing to comprehend the surreal experience unfolding before him. It was God speaking to him. The realization hit Moses like a thunderbolt. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the divine presence. The voice continued, instructing him to remove his sandals, for the ground he stood on was holy. Trembling, Moses obeyed, his heart filled with awe and reverence. God declared that he had seen the suffering of the Israelites and had chosen Moses to be their deliverer, to lead them out of slavery in Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. The words painted vivid images in Moses' mind of his people toiling under the harsh sun, their cries for freedom echoing in his ears. He felt a surge of determination, a burning desire to fulfill the divine mission entrusted to him. Moses was overwhelmed. The enormity of the task before him weighed heavily on his shoulders. He covered his face with his hands, struggling to process the magnitude of what was being asked of him. Doubts and fears swirled in his mind, threatening to paralyze him. He questioned his worthiness, his ability to fulfill such a monumental task. He looked at his reflection in a nearby pool of water, seeing a simple shepherd staring back at him. How could he, a man of no great stature or eloquence, stand before Pharaoh and demand the release of an entire nation? He stammered, expressing his lack of eloquence and fear of facing Pharaoh. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" The words felt inadequate, unable to convey the depth of his insecurities and fears. But God reassured him, promising to be with him every step of the way. The divine voice was unwavering, filled with a confidence that began to seep into Moses' heart. "I will be with you," God said. And those words became a lifeline, a beacon of hope in the midst of his doubts. He revealed his name to Moses, Yahweh meaning "I am who I am," signifying his eternal and unchanging nature. The revelation was profound, a declaration of God's omnipotence and timelessness. It was a name that carried the weight of eternity, a name that would become a cornerstone of faith for generations to come. This divine encounter transformed Moses. The fear and doubt that had once clouded his mind began to dissipate, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and resolve. He stood taller, his eyes reflecting the fire of determination that now burned within him. The shepherd, once content in his solitude, was now imbued with a divine purpose, a mission to liberate his people. The staff in his hand, once a simple tool of his trade, now symbolized the authority and power bestowed upon him by God. He gazed out over the vast desert landscape, his mind filled with visions of the journey ahead. Armed with God's assurance and a staff in his hand, Moses set out to confront Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites. The path before him was fraught with challenges, but he was no longer the hesitant shepherd. He was now a leader, chosen by God to bring his people to freedom. With each step he took, he carried the weight of his divine mission, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Moses, accompanied by his brother Aaron, returned to Egypt and stood before Pharaoh. He delivered God's message, "Let my people go, that they may serve me." Pharaoh, arrogant and dismissive, refused to acknowledge Yahweh or his demands. He scoffed at the idea of releasing his valuable workforce. To demonstrate his power and break Pharaoh's stubbornness, God unleashed a series of plagues upon Egypt. The Nile River, their lifeline, turned to blood. Swarms of locusts devoured their crops. Boils and sores afflicted the Egyptians. Darkness covered the land, yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he refused to relent. Finally, the 10th and most devastating plague struck, the death of the firstborn. Every firstborn son in Egypt, from the Pharaoh's palace to the humblest dwelling, died on that fateful night. Only the Israelites, who had marked their doorposts with the blood of a lamb as instructed by God, were spared. The death of his firstborn son finally broke Pharaoh's resolve. The once proud and unyielding ruler of Egypt was now a man shattered by grief. His palace, once a symbol of his might and power, echoed with the sounds of mourning. The loss was profound, and it was this heart-wrenching sorrow that finally led him to relent. He relented, allowing the Israelites to leave Egypt. The Israelites, who had endured generations of slavery and hardship, began their exodus. They moved as a unified mass, their hearts filled with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The promise of freedom was finally within their grasp, and they clung to it with every step they took. With Moses leading the way, they embarked on their long-awaited journey to freedom. Moses, their steadfast leader, guided them through the harsh and unforgiving desert. The sun beat down upon them, but their spirits were lifted by the promise of a new beginning. Each step they took was a step away from their past and towards a future filled with hope. But Pharaoh, his heart hardened once more, had a change of heart and pursued the Israelites with his army, determined to recapture his former slaves. The sight of his chariots racing across the desert sands was a terrifying reminder of the power he still wielded. His soldiers, loyal and fierce, were ready to bring the Israelites back to bondage. As the Israelites reached the shores of the Red Sea, they found themselves trapped, with the vast expanse of water in front of them and Pharaoh's chariots closing in behind them. The sea stretched out endlessly before them, a seemingly insurmountable barrier. Behind them, the dust clouds of Pharaoh's approaching army grew larger and more ominous with each passing moment. Fear and despair gripped the hearts of the Israelites. They could see no way out, no path to safety. The realization that they were trapped brought a wave of panic and hopelessness. Their cries of fear echoed across the shore, a chorus of desperation that seemed to drown out even the sound of the approaching chariots. They cried out to Moses, questioning if they had been led out of Egypt only to die in the wilderness. Their voices were filled with anguish and accusation. They had trusted Moses, and now they felt betrayed. The fear of death in the wilderness seemed worse than the life of slavery they had left behind. Moses, drawing strength from his faith in God, raised his staff. His face was a mask of determination and faith. He stood tall, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. His belief in the power of God was unshakable, and he knew that this moment was a test of that faith. A powerful wind began to blow, parting the waters of the Red Sea, creating a dry path through the midst of the sea. The sight was nothing short of miraculous. The waters rose up like walls on either side, leaving a clear path of dry land. The wind howled, but it was a sound that brought hope rather than fear. The Israelites, marveling at this miraculous event, walked through the parted sea, their footsteps echoing on the dry seabed. They moved forward with a renewed sense of purpose, guided by a pillar of light. The walls of water on either side were a constant reminder of the divine intervention that had saved them. Each step they took was a step towards freedom, a step towards a new life.